Hey guys, I know everybody's been eagerly awaiting the start of this tutorial series, so please bear with me when it comes to all the videos that are going to come up in the future, because I'm trying my best to get everything underway and doing it whilst managing to juggle other things. So, as I said, this is going to be the very start of the survival island, or the survival series of tutorials, and first of all we're going to start off by looking at creating an island or an island design. So, I don't know if anybody had actually seen, or anybody from the UK who'd seen Bear Grylls, I can't remember what it's called, Survival Island. And what they did was they set a group of 11 people on a desert island. They said, literally, you've got to survive. And it was quite a cool series, and I thought I'd, vaguely base the survival series on that. So what I was going to do is set it on an island, and you've got to survive anywhere you can with different areas. So if you look at this, I'm going to base it off the actual island that they used. And we're going to have a sort of beach stretch along the front and then the forested area around the back with this sort of layout. So what I've done originally is I've gone into 3ds Max and I've just taken the overall picture of the island, put it in my top view, and actually just made a quick mesh for this, because we're going to make this come out of our actual terrain. So we're going to make our terrain look somewhat like this shape. So first of all, what you want to do is you want to get yourself into Unity. So I've started a fresh scene for this series. So what you're going to need to bring in to your scene to initially start off with is really you're going to need the Skybox pack, which you can bring in when you create a new scene, or you can right click import package and then import all the standard assets packages unless I specify otherwise from here. So Skyboxes, you can bring in you need the character controller pack. You'll want something which it's either water, basic or pro, depending on which version of Unity you have. You'll want to bring in, if you want to use it, my 3ds Max file, and obviously I'll put all the files that you can't get easily to hand on my website, and I'll put it as a pack, and each week I'll update it. So sorry about if this tutorial is a little bit long, I'm just trying to explain everything that's going to be going on. And what you also might want is I've downloaded a sand textures pack, which is actually from the Unity asset store, which is a free asset. And all you need to do there is, if you just go on the asset store and search sand, you can download that asset pack. And then another thing that you want is I've got the tropical nature pack, which comes with a lot of cool trees. You can obviously use whichever trees you want, or even if you make your own, and I might do some tutorials on making your own sort of trees or whatever in the future, but for the sake of this it doesn't matter what trees we use, as long as you can get an idea about what we're actually going to be doing. So what we're going to do first of all is we've got a main camera in the scene. We don't want it for now. What I'll do is we'll go game object, create other, and we'll choose a terrain, and then we built a massive terrain within our scene, but we don't want it to be so massive, so we'll go over to the settings on the far side, and I'll actually change this to maybe 800 by 800, so maybe about 100 high. So when we've got that, what we actually want to then be able to do is we need a light source. So you can go game object, create other, then directional light, and then when we've pulled directional light in, you can obviously just rotate this, but we've got nothing in the scene, so we can't actually see anything. So what you're going to want to do is, whichever version of Unity, free or pro, you'd have to put hard shadows on for free, or I can put soft shadows on because I've got Unity Pro. Now obviously this doesn't differ from Unity Free to Pro for what we're going to be doing today. So then what we're going to want to do is go into the standard assets, bring in your character controller, and just drop in a first person character. And then I'm going to make sure that my character is actually above my terrain. And then what I'm going to do is unless you have already, is import the asset that I'll be putting into the survival pack. I'll put the island design in there, and that's just going to come with a sort of flat object. So what you want to do is actually drop this just into your scene anywhere, and then what we're going to actually do is maybe we'll scale this object up, maybe scale it to about 5. We'll hit apply, and then it'll come out in our scene. and what I'll do is rotate it so we get the way that we had it in the picture. So if I just zoom out a little bit, and you notice that I'll just place it about there. And then what I've got is I'll add this script to the pack, but you need to have an editor folder which has got a script called it's actually called Object to Terrain, but I've spelt it wrong. And what it'll do, this editor script, it'll add a little window to the top, a little drop down, because in the more recent version of Unity they changed the layout slightly, so it'll add a Object to Terrain icon. So what you can do is actually click on the obviously this island design that we brought in, and then what we can do is go on the Object to Terrain, and what that's actually going to do once we get rid of the actual island design, it'll actually place the island upon the actual terrain that we've got. But as you can see for now is that it looks quite high actually. So what we'll do is we'll go back into the terrain height, and then we'll maybe set that to something like 20. And then what we're going to do is we're going to want to add a quick texture to the whole of our actual island. So we'll go into the paint textures, we'll add a texture. You can obviously get these from the terrain texture pack, which is a standard asset, but seeing as though I have the tropical nature pack, it came with some good ground textures, so I'll add a ground texture that I just want to add to everything now, and I'll just quickly shift the tiling a little bit, maybe put it about 3 and 3 just for now. And now obviously when we run around, obviously I have to drop my controller in, you can see we actually can see a little bit more now. So once we've got that in, we've got the basic texture, we've got the basic shape of the terrain, and then we've got a basic layout to actually start working with. So what I actually like to do to begin with is maybe add something so we can actually start creating the boundaries of the island. So what I'm going to do is go to the standard assets, and obviously because I've got Unity Pro, I can add a daylight water. And what I'm going to do with that daylight water is I'm going to make it really big. But obviously you can use your normal Unity free water. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it up so it encapsulates the entire outside of the island. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my actual island, and I'm going to get the raise and lower height on the normal brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that hold shift, and we're going to start sinking in. What I might do actually is take the opacity down slightly, and I'm going to start sinking in the edges of my island. So this is going to act as like the beach area, because we wanted it to be underwater. I've just skipped on so that everybody can quickly see that all I'm doing is holding shift and just literally taking the terrain down so we get more of a flat edge all the way across. So then what we're going to do is we're going to choose another texture to paint with. We're going to add another texture, and with the sand texture pack what we're going to do is we're going to choose sand 5, and we're going to add the diffuse and add the normal, and we'll click add, and then we'll select that bit of sand, and what we'll do is I'll take the brush size down slightly, I'll take the target strength, make sure it's full, and then what we'll do is we'll just paint across the edge with the light sort of scale brush, and so we can give the illusion that we've actually got maybe like a beached edge. So if I run the game and it takes him a while to jump in, you'll notice that we get sort of a sandy effect leading on out into the ocean. And obviously you can change this terrain however you like. Now maybe we want to just click on that texture and make sure that it tiles a little bit more. So we want to maybe make sure it tiles a little bit more, and we'll click apply, and we'll get a bit of a bigger amount of tiling. Now obviously you can add the beach to wherever you feel that it should go, but what I'll do is I'll bring my character controller So I'll just position my character controller in a better place. Now obviously with the terrain you can add any amount of elements as you'd possibly like to add. So say I want this texture that looks like it could be more under the water. What I can do is I'll add another texture and I'll add the diffuse, and if it's got a normal you can add that. And we can add that, and what we can do is decrease the brush size again, and what we can do is maybe paint along here. Maybe it doesn't work with it coming quite so far out of the water, but I'll just paint along the edge so you can get an idea of what I'm getting at. And obviously we can paint across that edge, and then we can go towards the edge of the water, and you can see that you get more of that look to what a water effect would be. So obviously you could decrease the sort of height of this slope, we can reduce the whole entirety of the terrain, but for the sake of this I'll leave it like this because we're getting the sort of idea of an island at the moment. Now what you might want to actually do is go to render settings, and obviously if you've imported the skybox you can go over to the sunny skybox. You can add a sunny skybox, so we'll choose maybe skybox 3, and just to make sure, there we go, we've actually added that in to give us a bit of sort of realism to the scene. And now what you can also do to add a nice effect, if I make sure effects are on so we can see it within the scene, obviously now you can see the reflection in the water. Now if we go to the render settings and we'll enable some fog, what we can do is we can actually enable fog so we won't be able to see quite the horizon. So if I change this to linear, and then what I want to do is maybe change the fog colour to maybe what we had in the water, so I want quite a tropical, maybe a nice turquoisey look. Maybe I'll set the fog end to about 300. Obviously you might want to play with this, and then if you can obviously see the fog out in the distance in the ocean, however you want, and obviously you can obviously turn, if I put effects on, but I turn fog off because we don't want fog on because it's quite difficult to see in the scene. So we've got the beginnings to the sort of island, and I'll save this out for now. So then what we're going to do is we might want to add some different sort of elements to the overall of the scene. So we might want to add some different parts to the island where we might have water sources, or we might have different types of jungle areas, or we might have a swamp. So if I add something to my scene, so if I click on the terrain and I choose that this is going to be our more dense area of trees and things like that, what I'm going to do is we're going to make sure that maybe we'll have different areas of water sources. So what I'm going to actually do in my terrain is just add little markers to my terrain so I can quickly zoom in on it without having to make difficult problems. So I'll just take this down a little bit. Obviously this might be a little bit of a massive hole, and then obviously I'll leave this cube here and I'll rename it as like maybe water hole. And then what we'll do is we can obviously add, if we go to standard assets and then we go to maybe daylight water again, what we could do is we could add some water to this, and then maybe make it a different colour. So maybe we'll make it slightly more murky than the other one. And obviously you can mess around with whatever style of water you've got, so we might want to get some water from there. Or maybe when we go to this part of the island, I'll grab the water point again and we'll duplicate it. I'm just showing you different things that you can do to make your island differentiate between everybody's, because at the end of the day I can't really show you to make one thing. You'll want to do this, try this yourself and make it look however you want it to be. So obviously what we could do here, we could add a bigger sort of depth, and what we could start doing is, obviously like I said before, we could add another pool of water, but this time we could maybe make it a lot darker. But actually what we could do is add a bit over here which could be like a more of a swampy area, and then what we could do is we could go to the foliage, we could add some new trees, and we could add some, for me I've got some mangrove trees that I could have, and I could add those. What I'll do is I'll take the brush size down, and maybe we could add these around in this sort of area, just for the sake of showing you this in the tutorial. Now obviously on your beachfront, what you might want to have is you could add some trees. Obviously, as I'm saying, I'm just showing you. We could add some trees that you might have, sort of like a coconut or something like that, which might work. Oops, I clicked on the wrong tree. You make sure you click the right tree, and you add your palm trees across the island, or however you want those to be. And then obviously we can play the scene, and we'll get the sort of palm tree effect. And obviously the thing is, I'm not going into heavy detail about trees, is because the ones that we want to cut down we're going to have to place ourselves, because I've not found or really researched a way of being able to cut down a tree which you've placed with the terrain, because they're all part of the static terrain, so it's hard to be able to do something. So you want to choose what trees you want to be able to chop down is ones that you're going to place yourself. So you want to be able to have other trees that maybe you can add which wouldn't normally be able to be chopped down. And similarly, it doesn't matter with the bushes as such, because we can add the berries and stuff later on. So I've got a whole host of sort of plants or trees that could be added to the scene. So obviously I can add different variations of trees into the scene. Obviously, as I say, use whatever you've got, and you can make an interesting look of a sort of styled or desert island. But you can make sure you can add some different styled plants all over. And obviously you can just add new meshes all the time, and you can obviously go back to whichever things you want. We could add some bamboo or some smaller pieces. And obviously it can just add, obviously this has just been stuff thrown together really. I haven't taken much time or much thought in really putting stuff in the island that you could see or you could be believable. But you know, overall you can go and make a sort of visually appealing item just using that. And obviously what we could do is, if we wanted a bit more foliage in the particular areas, we can go and paint details, and we can add a new detail mesh. And obviously, like some of these, what we'll be able to do is paint them in. So what we can do is we can take the target strength down along with the opacity, and we can add sort of different areas where we'd have particular object. Obviously we need to edit these details so they're more in keeping with the actual colours of the forest itself. And obviously you can add grass textures, you can add a sort of, there's a ground cover texture here which I might apply. Obviously you can see it here. We can apply different elements. Maybe I'll apply it over at this little water pool. You can zoom in, apply whatever you like to it. What I can obviously do is bring my character controller over. So I never said this would be the definitive way of to truly make something that you desire, but the thing is, it takes a lot of experimenting, a lot of really working out. So maybe for my next tutorial I'll redo this island a little bit and I'll make it more of a structured sort of layout. But really I'm just showing bits that you can actually produce and put together with however you want and however you feel like you want your island to look. So really for this I don't want any wind, so I'll take all my wind settings down because it's something I really don't want. And maybe with your directional light, you might want to make a sort of a warmer colour for your entire scene. But really, this was just a real base on how you might want to set yourself up an island. Obviously, if we go to a top-down view, you might want to put more coverage in these parts where there's the darker. On your beach, you might have rows of coconut trees or any sort of trees you've got, and then maybe have your swampland more at the back towards where you might get a more abundance of the sort of bigger animals at the back of the island. But as I say, when we look from a top-down view, or we go back to a perspective of the entire island, you can get the look of an island that you might want to be looking to create for your survival game. So hopefully this sort of helped people out and gave you an idea of what sort of creative things you could do and make it look like realistically a survival island. So thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.